The LS motor is very popular and very powerful, and for good reason. It is by all measure a worthy successor to the original small block. And it doesn't matter whether you have a 4.8 liter LR4 or the supercharged LS9, Comp Cams has got a cam for you. We've got an LS3 crate motor here. We're going to swap a cam. Before we can do that, we've got to remove the valve cover, the coil pack, and spark plugs. Let's take a look. Off comes the coil pack. Next are the spark plugs. Followed by the valve cover. With the valve cover off, now we've got access to the rockers. Now that we've removed the valve covers, we have access to the rocker arms. We're going to unbolt all the rockers, and the whole rocker and pedestal come off as one assembly. Before we can do that, as you can see, we've got two rockers that have spring load on them. We're going to have to undo all of the other rockers, rotate the motor, and then come back to those two. Let's get going. Now we've loosened all the other rockers. We're going to rotate the motor, get the spring pressure off of those two. Zip those two off. Now we can remove it all as one assembly. The final step is to remove all of the push rods. If this were a factory application that had a factory non-hardened push rod, remember, it's always a good idea to put a Comp Cam's hardened push rod in, especially if you've got increased valve string pressure. Now that we've finished the driver's side, we need to perform the same operation over on the passenger side. Once we're done with those, we're heading to the front of the motor. Now that we've removed the rockers and the push rods, we can take a look at the front of the motor. We've got a crate motor, so life is really easy for us. All we have is a water pump and a dampener and the front cover. In a car or a truck, you may have to deal with the radiator hoses, and heater hoses. But for us, we're going to start with the water pump. Now we're going to remove the 6 10mm bolts holding the water pump. We've got a crate motor, so all this stuff is brand new. If you've got a motor that's got 50, 100, 150,000 miles on it, good idea to change the gaskets. We've removed the water pump, but to get access to the camshaft, we've got to remove the dampener. We use this special tool. As you can see, it's a 3-jaw design. These teeth were designed specifically for an LS dampener. If we look at this dampener that we've already removed, those teeth engage these little indentations in the back. Once that's in place, we adjust the bolt, the dampener comes off. With the dampener off, well, now we can turn our attention to the front cover. Don't forget these bottom bolts. Now that we've removed the front cover, we're going to rotate the motor. This will do two things. One, it will get all the lifters up out of the way into those trays, and two, it will line up the marks. We'll put this thing at TDC so that we know when we take the cam out and put the new cam in, it'll always be at top dead center. And as we can see our timing mark here, we're going to bring that down to where it lines up with the corresponding timing mark down at the bottom sprocket right there. We're going to go take a look at another motor without the oil pump on, and we'll show you how to line up the marks. Normally you can see the upper and lower timing sprockets with the oil pump on, so when you make a cam change, you do not have to change the oil pump. All we've done is remove it here so that you can see the marks a little easier. So if we rotate this, we get to see our upper timing mark. We can see that right here. We'll keep going until the upper and lower timing marks line up. Got our upper and lower timing marks. They're lined up. We're at TDC. Let's do the cam swap. This particular LS3 has a chain tensioner on it. What we've got to do is take the tension off of the tensioner, slide this little pin in here, lock the tensioner in place, no more tension. Now that we've taken all the tension off of the tensioner, we can remove the cam bolts. Now that we've removed the timing sprocket, we have access to the cam retaining plate. So we'll unbolt these 4 bolts. Notice the gasket, very important. Now that we've removed the cam retaining plate, what we want to do is spin the cam around a couple times just to make sure that the lifters are all up in the lifter trays. Then, using these tools, we can ensure that they stay there. Most of the time they do, but you want to be sure you don't want one falling down into the motor. So we slide these into the holes. That will keep the lifters in place when you remove the cam. We want to make sure we're very careful taking the cam out. We don't want to damage any of the cam bearings, any of the lobes. Very slowly, nice and safe. And we're good. Now it's time to put in our comp cams. Slide it in nice and easy. Now we made sure to put plenty of oil on the camshaft before installing it. This is very important. Do not install the camshaft without cleaning it and oiling it first. So let's get it the rest of the way in. Now that our cam retaining plate is in place, we're going to go ahead and torque these to the factory setting, 18 foot-pounds. Now that we've installed the cam retaining plate, it's time to put on the cam sprocket. One of the tricks we like to do is so that we make sure the cam is in the right spot before we put the timing gear on. So we'll put the sprocket on with one bolt, spin the sprocket so that the timing marks are lined up with the upper and lower sprockets. Then we can take this back on and we're ready to put the chain on. We've installed the sprocket in the chain. The upper and lower timing marks are lined up. Now all I have to do is slide this onto the cam, grab one of our cam bolts, now we're in business. With all the bolts in place, torque these to 26 foot-pounds. With our timing sprocket in place, we can now pull the pin from the tensioner. When installing a performance cam on an LS application, there's something very important to consider, and that's cam sprocket. On our LS3 crate motor, the factory cam would have come with a single bolt 4X cam sprocket. Now we've installed a 3-bolt cam, which means we had to install a 3-bolt 4X cam sprocket. When you're installing a cam, make sure you use the right sprocket. Now that we have the cam sprocket all installed, we're going to put on the front timing cover. But make sure that you only put it on finger tight to begin with, because you can't tighten the front cover bolts until you put the dampener on. So let's put the dampener in place. Got our homemade little dampener tool. We'll tighten this down initially with this tool, then we'll use the factory bolt. We're going to drive it in the rest of the way. According to the factory procedure, GM wants you to tighten this thing down to 250 foot-pounds to make sure that the dampener is seated properly. Then back off the factory bolt, replace the bolt, tighten it to 37 foot-pounds, and then go another 140 degrees. We now need to move it 140 degrees, which is basically with the ratchet from here all the way to there. With the dampener on, now it's time to reassemble. We can tighten our front cover bolts. Followed by the push rods. Next come the rocker arms. Put those on all as one assembly. Run these down very lightly. Now we can tighten any of the rockers that don't have spring pressure on them. What we'll do is tighten those first, rotate the motor, take the spring pressure off the other rockers, and then tighten those down. Okay, let's rotate it around. Now that we've rotated the motor, we can snug up the last 2 rockers. Get those snug. Reach over for our torque wrench. Tighten them down to 22 foot-pounds. Now it's ready for the valve cover. With our valve cover in place, next comes the coil pack. Final step are the spark plugs. As you can see, our LS3 motor's back together. We finished our cam swap, and we know from testing a camshaft all by itself can be worth 40, 50, even 60 horsepower. So get out there, get a cam, and get back to basics.